What happens when a Hollywood fighter enters the lion's den? But this time she's facing not fists, but the sharp tongues of daytime television. When Emma Watson was invited onto The View for a friendly chat, no one expected to witness such a clash on screen. This is the story of how respect turned to mockery and how Emma stood her ground. Hold on, because you'll see how an internationally respected actress and activist faced an unexpected attack while maintaining her grace, only to leave the table with words that will never be forgotten. The View studio was bustling with activity that morning. Producers were bustling about, finishing touches were being made, and an excited buzz filled the audience seats. Soon all eyes would be on Emma Watson. She wasn't just Harry Potter's Hermione. She was also the woman whose United Nations speech shaped the voice of a generation, elegant yet courageous, calm yet determined. As the cameras rolled, Emma stepped onto the stage in an elegant, cream-toned suit. Her familiar smile was on her face, and her eyes held a sharper focus than the press throng she was accustomed to. The audience applauded, but Emma began to sense a sense of unease. After years of immersion in the media, she had learned to trust her instincts. "Ladies and gentlemen," Joy Behar said, her voice laced with artificial sweetness, "we have with us today not only an actress, but also a young woman dedicated to activism, Emma Watson." "Thank you for the invitation," Emma said gently, her voice soft but clear. She nodded to the other presenters and settled into her guest chair. But she soon sensed it. That twinkle in Joy's eyes, it signaled not sincere conversation, but a challenge. Joy leaned in and smiled wryly. "Emma, I hope you don't mind me calling you that. I want to ask you this. For over a decade, you've been on the podium more than on screen. You've been doing more activism than acting. Have you ever considered whether the world might be saturated with your ideas?" A few people in the audience laughed shyly. Emma smiled back, but her gaze turned serious. She crossed her legs and placed her hands gracefully on her knees. "Joy," she said in a polite but firm tone, "the world may be changing, but change begins with ideas. Retiring from the screen doesn't mean I'm leaving the stage. What we're going to say today can touch more people than any of the roles on stage, and I want to be a part of that touch." Joy spoke, not taking her eyes off her notes. "You know, Emma, young women like you talk all the time about struggle, equality, rights, but sometimes it's necessary to ask, doesn't all this talk give young girls the illusion that they can only talk their way out of the real world instead of taking the punches?" A slight unease permeated the studio. The audience whispered to each other. Emma clasped her hands together, her eyes never leaving Joy's, as she gently replied, "Joy, I'm trying to show young women how powerful it is to resist with words, not fists. This isn't an illusion, it's the voice of truth. The way to overcome every challenge isn't to shout, fight, or remain silent. Sometimes resilience lies in the quietest moments." Sunny Hostin, another presenter at the table, chimed in, "Emma, don't you think it's a little old-fashioned? Constant equality, feminism. Maybe audiences today want a more sophisticated message." Emma turned her gaze to her. Her smile remained unchanged, but her voice was now deeper. "Sophistication is trying to change the world with words, choosing silence and using it to shake systems. Some people become visible by shouting, but sometimes a whisper is louder than a scream." Joy rolled her eyes and leaned back. "But really, isn't it always the same message, no matter where you are? The underlying message of every discourse is the same: equality, freedom, change. Different clothes, the same ideas. Do you still find that interesting?" Her words seemed polite, but there was a hint of contempt hidden beneath them. Emma changed her stance this time. She crossed her legs, straightened her back, and placed her hands on her knees. "I became the voice of the oppressed. I spoke out against child labor. I spoke out for the right to education, against violence against women, and for the environment. If these things keep happening, it's because there are still things in the world that need to change. And yes, these ideas are universal." A light applause rose from the hall, but Joy raised her hand, making a gesture of silence. "Oh, Emma," he said scornfully, "don't present it like Shakespeare. You haven't been on stage. You're not a world leader. You've only given a few speeches, and you've been reaping the rewards of those moments for years." The presenters' faces tensed. The audience fell silent. Emma's expression remained unchanged. She simply fixed her gaze, her voice low but clear. Everyone has a different stage, Joy. Mine was on the podium, sometimes in the streets, sometimes in silent protests. No one gave me that stage. I built it myself. Joy chuckled. Yeah, the UN speech, being an activist as a child. We've heard those stories so many times, but let's be honest, years have passed. Maybe it's time to step aside. Emma stared at him for a long moment. She was silent for a moment. In that moment, the studio atmosphere shifted. It was as if someone had sucked the oxygen out of her. When the cameras came back on after the commercial break, everyone knew. The storm inside Emma Watson was slowly building. She hadn't even yelled yet, but now his eyes spoke louder than any words. Emma's face remained calm, but her eyes, they had taken on a much deeper tone than brown, almost steely, sharp. Her gaze never left Joy's. Joy, instead of being intimidated by that look, seemed even more emboldened. The atmosphere in the studio had grown tense. The audience sensed the approaching storm. Joy pretended to flip through her notes, but everyone knew the questions were already memorized. So, Emma, she said, her voice sweet but with a spiky undertone, do you really still consider yourself an actress? Or are you just playing Emma Watson every now and then? A faint murmur rose from one or two members of the audience. A slight smile touched Emma's lips. It wasn't a defense, but a genuine irony. Joy, she said softly but clearly, those who know me as an actor don't just look at my filmography, they look at the depth of the ideas I've played. Perks of Being a Wallflower, The Bling Ring, Little Women, each one a different voice, a different face. They've all brought something to me. Joy chuckled. Oh my God, please. How many years ago were those movies? You were young and hungry back then. But now, isn't it easier to repeat the same messages? The role of a feminist actor? It sounds like a safe haven. Don't you ever take risks? This statement elicited a few uncomfortable whispers from the audience. Emma leaned forward slightly. Her voice was barely a whisper, but every word was clear. Every word I spoke was a risk. Every silence I made was criticized. Every word I spoke was snipped. You only see the screen. But behind that screen, you don't know what it means to express an opinion as a woman. You can't judge me without understanding that. Whoopi tried to interject, her voice soft but cautionary. Maybe we could talk a little about your new projects, Emma. What inspires you? But Joy raised her hand, interrupting. Oh no, Whoopi. If she's not here today just to promote herself, she should be answering real questions. Emma, I want to ask you this. If people are still watching you, is it because they genuinely value what you have to say? Or is it just nostalgia? Do you have anything new to say anymore? That last sentence was so harsh that a hushed silence fell in the studio. A faint "ah" came from one of the audience members. Emma's hands clasped tightly on her knees. Her shoulders tensed, but still her voice didn't rise. On the contrary, it grew deeper. Joy, she said, exhaling slowly. You speak boldly. I can't deny that. But what you're saying is so far from reality. You're sitting here in a comfortable position with your camera and your audience waiting for applause. But there are young girls out there clinging to what I say. There are children being sent back to school for the first time after my speech. My voice isn't just mine, and your condescending comments disregard their experience. Joy's condescending smile faltered, but Emma still didn't shout. Her eyes were shining brighter. You don't know anything about me, Emma said, never taking her eyes off Joy. Her voice was still calm, but her words were no longer soft. They were sharp, direct, and filled with a familiar determination. Joy shrugged disdainfully. Oh, of course, Emma, it's the oppressed woman role again. You're still fighting the good fight, aren't you? You still believe you inspire people with nothing but elegant sentences. But let's be honest, no one buys that anymore. The world has changed. You're a relic. These words swept through the studio like a cold wind. Emma's posture shifted. She straightened her back, squared her shoulders. Her voice was still quiet, but its meaning resonated with every corner of the studio. A relic, she repeated. So when the world changes, does the past become irrelevant? Do old values suddenly fall by the wayside just because people want new things? Empathy, equality, justice. These are things that are still needed. They're still an inspiration. And yes, Joy, I'm still here. Like it or not, but I'm here, and that's still important. Sunny Hostin at the table tried to intervene, her voice barely a whisper. Maybe what Joy means is, I could be wrong, but maybe it's time to make room for new voices and to step back a little for legends like you. Emma turned her gaze to Sunny. Her smile was gentle, but her voice held firmness. I'm not taking anyone's place, Sunny. I fought to be here because I spoke tirelessly, because I couldn't be silenced. I'm here. Making room for new voices doesn't mean silencing old ones. There's room for all of us, but that place has to be earned. Joy laughed, sharp, artificial, and provocative. Yes, you fought so hard, didn't you? The same old story. The silenced woman, the brave young girl. Aren't you tired of this fairy tale by now? The truth is, you're afraid of becoming obsolete, of being disgraced, of being forgotten. That's why you keep repeating the same things. Actually, Tex, it's tragic. A murmur rose from the hall. Even the crew behind the cameras was starting to get restless. But Emma, she continued to stare at Joy without blinking. She leaned forward. Her hands were clasped on her knees again. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it filled the studio. Do you know what's tragic, Joy? Not those who sit here every day building things, not those who target those who try to destroy them, not those like you who just talk, those who criticize those who make real contributions just to feel powerful. There was silence in the studio, a tense, jarring silence. You think this is journalism. You call it holding people accountable, but it's not. It's a false mask worn by hurt, jealousy, and a quest for superiority. And you think you've built a career under that mask for years by belittling people. Congratulations. Joy's face flushed, but she tried to smile. That familiar, sly smile. Oh, look. A strong woman has become sensitive. Did I push your buttons, Emma? Did the truth hurt you? Emma didn't move. She answered without averting her eyes. Truth? Her voice was icy calm. You don't know the truth, Joy. The truth is sitting there, listening to you politely and still holding your opinion. The truth is resisting without hurting, and you've been turning a blind eye to it for years. The studio erupted in applause, some heartfelt, some nervous, some simply unsure of what to do. Some remained silent, their hands on their knees, their eyes fixed on Emma. The air was thick now. Even breathing was becoming difficult. Everyone felt it then. A storm was approaching. When the cameras came back on after commercial, the silence was even deeper. No one moved. Even the audience seemed to hold their breath. On stage, two opposing forces, eye to eye, Emma Watson and Joy Behar. Joy straightened her papers. It was an uneasiness disguised as professionalism. She smiled, but that smile was the cold signal of a predator baring its teeth. So, Emma, she said, her voice venomous and tinged with sweetness, before the commercial, you accused me of jealousy and prejudice. But perhaps the truth is, your rhetoric is really superficial. Could it be that people don't believe you? Emma's lips twitched slightly, but she didn't move from her seat. Her posture was rigid, her eyes were locked on Joy's. My words, she said in a slow but clear tone, are to give people hope, to those who, when life overwhelms them, are looking for something to cling to. If you can't see that, it's not my problem. It's yours, Joy. Joy didn't slow down. This time her voice was sharper. Every word was designed to cut through. Hope? She taunted. Come on, Emma. Is getting up on stage and reciting a few memorized passages, a text prepared at the UN, really hope now? You've been telling young girls for years to be yourself, make your voice heard. But are you really teaching them how to change the world? Or are you just stalling them with flashy phrases? Her words spread like smoke through the studio. Even Whoopi couldn't say anything this time. She pressed her lips together, averting her eyes. Emma took a deep breath. Her hands were still on her knees, but now the tips of her fingers were pressing together. Joy, she said finally, Have you ever stood on stage, looked people in the eye, and spoken out the things they were forced to keep silent about? Have you ever had to tell the stories of being undervalued simply because you were a woman? The stories of being belittled simply because of your gender? Have you ever carried someone else's pain on your shoulders? Not your own. A faint murmur of yes rose from the hall. Emma's voice deepened. Her eyes weren't moist, just determined. I didn't just defend myself on that podium. I represented a girl who couldn't speak out in Pakistan, a child carrying books in a war zone, those who couldn't say, I'm in too. I think I gave hope. You're just belittling her. Applause began to rise from the hall, but Joy raised her hand as if she were still in control. Oh yes, we know that story too, he said sarcastically. The UN speech, children's rights, activism. You've told the same things hundreds of times. But maybe people aren't buying that story anymore, Emma. Maybe enough is enough. Joy leaned forward. Her voice was no longer sarcastic. It was sarcastic, direct, and cutting. Oh yes, Emma. Those book campaigns you started when she was a kid, your UN speech, hope for women, courage for young girls. These are your trademarks now, aren't they? But one touching story doesn't justify a lifetime of superficial slogans. After a while, you're just repeating yourself. And let's be frank, that's just mediocrity. The sentence brought a momentary flicker of pain to Emma's eyes, but then came that familiar, steely glint. She replied without raising her voice, but the words hit like a slap. Mediocrity. Her voice was low, but clear. In a world where we're told enough is enough every day, standing up and saying no, not yet isn't ordinary. Creating space for the silenced, making visible the ignored, saying you have a place too to those made to feel worthless. If that sounds ordinary to you, then our definitions of value are very different, Joy. There was a low round of applause from the audience, but Joy quickly retracted her words. And do you think it actually has an impact? She asked, her voice now filled with an impatience that was gritting her teeth. What's out there? A few college students inspired by your words? Fans repeating the same lines? A few interviews, a few videos, and a few forgotten campaigns? Emma, you're not an inspiration. You're an illusion. The other presenters at the table shifted uneasily. Everyone in the studio understood that this was now reaching a dangerous point, but Joy wouldn't back down. As if to deliver the final blow, she raised her voice. Do you know what I see when I look at you? A face that once shone with luck, a once respected figure. But now you're just a parody, Emma, a mascot of old ideas, a joke. The last word fell like a hammer on the studio floor. A joke. The room fell silent, and in that moment, Emma Watson's control cracked for the first time. But it wasn't anger. It was an echo returned with dignity. She leaned forward slowly. She locked eyes with Joy. Her voice was harsher than the silence. Are you trying to call me a joke? She paused. Without looking away, she continued. Okay, if it makes you feel powerful, call me whatever you like. But remember this, the real joke is that you think you're a journalist. You're not reporting the news. You're a bystander, standing in the shadows but speaking in the light. You're just a bystander with a camera. A ooh rose from the room. Joy's face flushed, but Emma hadn't finished her sentences. She took a deep breath and straightened up. Her voice still didn't rise to the top, but the fire within her seeped through the words. You sit here and belittle people, those who do real work, those who dream, those who struggle. You tear down, you mock, you belittle, and then you call it questioning. But you don't question anyone, Joy. You just feed off the work of others. This isn't criticism. This is envy. Everyone in the studio had fallen silent. Emma's breathing was heavier now. Her chest was heaving, but her voice remained firm. It's not the idea that hurts you, it's honor. And I will not be silenced by your contempt masked by your false intelligence. The UN speech, the UN Women campaign, he for she, they're all part of your brand now, Joy said wryly. But here's the thing, Emma. A scene from 10 years ago doesn't justify today's superficiality. A single moving speech doesn't justify a lifetime of repeated cliches. This statement sparked a spark in Emma's eyes. What she resented wasn't being belittled, but having the values she championed so easily disregarded. Superficiality? She asked, her voice low but clear enough to shake the walls of the hall. To you, depth might be a crowd shouting, but to me, it's the courage a single person finds in their inner voice. It's being able to tell a girl who feels worthless, you exist. That's not superficiality, that's leaving a mark. Joy's smile had vanished. And then what's left, Emma? She asked, this time with a harsher tone. A group of young fans? Dwindling projects? TEDx talks on the same topics? What's really left for two? I think you shone once, but now you exist only by the echo of that single spark. You're not an inspiration, but a mascot, a symbol stuck in the past, a joke. The room froze. The word joke cut through the air like a knife. Emma's face didn't contort, but there was a movement in her body. She held her familiar posture, but the tremors within her eyes were palpable. If it makes you feel powerful to see me as a joke, Joy, she said quietly, say whatever you want. But let me explain something. The real joke is that you think you're a journalist. A gasp, a murmur from the audience. Joy's face flushed, but Emma continued. This time her voice began to rise, slowly but overflowingly. You sit here every day, belittling the people who build things, who touch lives. You ridicule them, diminish them before your very eyes. Then you justify it under the guise of interrogation. But you don't hold them accountable, Joy. You only exaggerate yourself by riding the pain of others. She was breathing deeply now, but her breath wasn't filled with anger, but with courage. She paused, she looked, her eyes were glazed over. You think you know me, but you've never walked a day in my shoes. You've never once put your own life in the background for someone else's honor. You're safe only here, in this chair. And from there you throw stones. But throwing stones isn't living. Joy tried to say something, but the words caught in her throat. Emma didn't give her a chance. I've worked my whole life to lift people up. I've given them reason to believe. What's your legacy, Joy? You just build walls to be torn down. You're not a builder. You're a destroyer. Dead silence in the studio. Even the cameras seemed unsure of who to focus on. Finally, Joy spoke. Her voice was trembling, but she still held her stubbornness. If you can't handle a few tough questions, Emma, maybe you shouldn't be on this screen. Maybe you should just quietly step off the stage and avoid further embarrassing yourself. Emma shook her head slowly. She smiled, but that smile was laced with painful determination. No, Joy, she said. You don't decide when I leave the stage. You don't decide when I stop talking, when I step back. And most importantly, you're not more right than I am. You just speak louder, but louder doesn't mean right. These words hit the studio like a nail. Emma still hadn't gotten up, but it was clear now. If they went one step further, this stage would be her farewell. Emma gently placed her microphone on the table. She flattened it with her fingers. She took a deep breath. I've come here today, she said, her voice a slow, steady rhythm, to talk about what I've done, what I believe, what I've learned along the way, to tell the story of a struggle to which I've dedicated my life. I thought we'd have a respectful dialogue here. The audience listened intently. No one moved, even their breaths held in silence. But Joy rolled her eyes. Oh my God, save us from this saintly literature, she said with a cold smile. No one believes your fairy tale anymore, Emma. You're living in the shadow of that inspiring speech from years ago. You're rich, famous, and yet you still act like you're being crushed. Emma sat up slowly. The slight creak of her rising from her red chair echoed through the studio. She tensed her shoulders. Her gaze now scanned the entire studio. You? She said, her voice now a few decibels higher but still gentle. You don't know what inspiration is. Struggle, sacrifice, resilience. You've never truly grasped any of this. You've only watched from the sidelines, insulting those who create, those who believe, those who struggle. Joy tried to open her mouth, but Emma silenced her with a very gentle yet firm gesture of her hand. No, it's not your turn to speak anymore. Her voice was now a gentle tremor. It was the expression of years of pent-up resentment. You've tried to tear me down this entire program. My faith, my work, my fans, my audience, my story. You've tried to belittle all of it. You're marketing this as journalism, but it's not. This is throwing rocks from behind a pole. Emma took a step forward. Her presence now dominated the entire stage. It was as if the lights had dimmed even further. Only she and her voice remained. Are you wondering what I am, Michael Joy? Her voice was barely a whisper, but even without a microphone, it carried throughout the hall. I'm not someone who talks like you. I'm someone who builds. You're someone who just throws mud so they can wash it away. Joy's throat tightened. For the first time, she couldn't answer. Emma's eyes locked on hers. Do you think I'm here because I care what you think? No, Joy. I'm here because a young girl watching me on the screen can say, I have a place in this world too. I'm here because those people still need a light, and your condescension won't extinguish that light. No one in the audience spoke. It was as if everyone held their breath at the same time, and Emma Watson continued speaking. You think you're the voice of the people here, but you don't even listen to them. You just talk more. You shout louder. But know that shouting doesn't make you right, and what you say no longer resonates because there's emptiness inside. He paused for a moment. He turned to the camera. His eyes were still shining, but this time not with anger, but with pride. And that is over for me, he said. They were inspired, Emma said, now speaking without a microphone, but her voice filling every corner of the hall. They dared to keep going, to resist, to rise again, because through my words, I reminded them of something, that they are not alone. She turned her eyes to the audience. I am here for them, not for you. Joy's face was now red with anger, but her hands, she was trembling. Emma continued, her gaze never leaving his. You present yourself as the voice of the people, but you don't even listen to them. You just speak louder, because you're afraid of being noticed otherwise. Her voice rose slightly, this time. Your words are empty, Joy, and that's why they mean nothing. Emma picked up the microphone from the table. She watched it with a brief glance. Then gently but clearly, she returned it to the table. A clicking sound pierced the silence of the studio. Then he straightened his jacket. He tenses his shoulders. He glances once more at the audience and heads for the studio exit, but he stops before reaching the door. He turns back slowly, and he doesn't leave without saying the last word. You call it journalism. You call it speaking the truth. But if you want, I'll tell you what it is. It's a circus, a cheap circus, and the clowns inside still don't even realize who they're mocking. Joy's eyes were completely blank now. And Emma, she looked him straight in the eyes. You've spent your life trying to pull people down, trying to make them forget your own hurt. But what you see when you look in the mirror is your biggest secret, because in that mirror, there's nothing. He turns away. His footsteps echoed across the studio floor. There was no music, no applause, just a silence left behind. Emma Watson walked off set. The cameras were still rolling, but all that was on screen was Joy's frozen face, the other presenters' downcast eyes, and the audience's stunned faces. Some applauded silently, some simply sat there. But everyone knew they were watching something, and not just any argument, an unforgettable stance. So what do you think? Was Emma Watson right? Can words, cultivated over years, be more powerful than silence? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for stories like this.